All right, folks, we are back here on Issues and Answers Friday, My Country with Scott Cannon. Deep into the second hour. It is 7:34 in the p.m. on January the 12th, 2024. It is my big sister's birthday, so I just want to say happy birthday, Ray. Happy birthday. I ain't going to say how old you are because Rev always taught me not to say women's ages when I do the happy segment. So that's something I got from the Rev. But happy, I love you nonetheless. There you go. But that's not the only good news that's going on right now, folks. As you guys know, there's a lot of serious things going on in the world. A lot of wars being fought. People are afraid. World War III is about to get started in the Middle East, and with Russia and China and Iran and the Houthi rebels and Lebanon and Hezbollah and the Israelis and the Palestinians and Hamas. But that doesn't mean that there is nothing going on that is positive in our society. You know, I know it can, even listening to this show, I'm sure we just did the Epstein story, and talked about Cat Williams in the first segment. So it can always seem like there's something stressful going on, but sometimes there is good news. And it's exactly during those times we have to celebrate it in our segment I call Good News.
There is a light for the blind man, a sound for deaf ears. There's riches for forgotten souls that have nothing left to give. There is freedom from bondage for those who can't break free. This is the gospel of Jesus, and it's good news. Let us remember we have good news. We won't hide it in the shadows. We will light up the truth. Tell everybody what he's done for you. Shout it from the rooftops. We got good news. Hey!
Yes, it is good news here on Friday, January the 12th. The U.S., the country I think most of us listening to this show are living in, ended with 2,000 fewer homicides than in the year 2022. That's right. The U.S. has seen a record drop in yearly homicides in spite of public concerns over crime. The nation finished the year with the biggest annual drop in homicides on record, according to preliminary data from law enforcement agencies, both large and small. The homicide rate in the United States is expected to plummet nearly 13% in comparison to 2022, meaning that more than 2,000 fewer people were victims of homicide in the year 2023. According to Jeff Asher, a national crime analyst, he told this to ABC News. That's where the story is from. So I didn't make this up. You can go, it's on ABC News. Look it up. 100%. The drop in homicides comes as more than 3/4 of Americans say that there is more crime in the U.S. than a year ago. And more than half of Americans say that the same about crime in their local area, according to a Gallup poll released last month. Adding to that perception is that the annual National Crime Victimization Survey published this month by the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics found that the number of violent crime victims nationwide climbed from 16 per 1,000 people in 2021 to 23.5 per 1,000 in 2022. Cities are saying that the 2023 drop in homicides and other violent crimes can be attributed to expanded efforts to prevent crime, including working with the community, volunteers, targeting gun possession in high crime areas, and placing officers on foot and bike patrol. That ain't what it is. That ain't what it is, okay? I'm going to tell you what it is. And I've talked about this many, many times before here on this show. I talked about it on Mondays when I was on Mondays. We've seen an overall trend for the last 30 years of plummeting violent crime in this country. Since the mid-90s. 1993, I believe, was the most violent year. 93 or 94 was the most violent year in American history that was recorded, right? So from that point on, we've seen violent crime plummet throughout the Great Recession, through the Bush era, through the Obama era, and, started to go back up a little bit during the Trump era, the late Obama era, the early Trump era. We saw a little bit, but not anywhere near where it was in the 80s and 90s and whatnot. The pandemic saw a huge spike in crime because people's livelihoods and emotions were all stirred up during the pandemic, and due to what happened with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests all over the country. And so what we saw was a temporary kind of madness come over the country. What we are doing now is reverting to the mean. This is where we were before the pandemic started. We were a country that had seen violent crime plummet over 30 years. Now, one of the reasons I think it's important to cover this story is that our media, I believe, purposely tries its best to scare the hell out of everybody about crime, particularly in black communities, in inner cities. It benefits them to make young black people out to be the most crazy, wild, and violent people on the planet. And a lot of us buy into that. And that's the sad thing about it. Whenever I talk about crime going down, there's 100 people who want to call me up and argue with me about it. But when I say crime is going up, they never doubt it. Never. Even when I listen to the station when I'm not on it, so many people never have anything positive to say about young people in the city of Gary or in this country, particularly young black kids. It is always something negative. They wear their pants hanging down, and then ain't none of them got no respect, and all of them drop out of school, and they don't want to work, and they don't want to. It is always negative. Nothing positive about the young people in this country today. And the numbers, and I keep telling you guys, the numbers, look at the numbers, the data. Today's young people, we've seen some of the lowest violent crime rates in this country's history in the last decade. We had the highest high school graduation rate ever right before the pandemic started. I covered that story back when I was on Monday too. Or was it during one of my counterpoint segments? I believe it might have been during one of the counterpoint segments some years ago. We've seen the lowest teenage pregnancy rate. Study just came out a few weeks ago. Young people are not having sex. Like, teenage pregnancy rates are at all-time lows. Young people today are not sexually active. Like, overwhelmingly. Now there's a lot of complex and often not good things behind that as well. So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying the way that young people are portrayed in our media. Go back to the very first segment. Again, a lot of things we talk about connect. When we talked about Cat Williams, this goes back to us not controlling our images because we don't own anything. Because we don't own anything in this country. We don't own the media. And so the media can just perpetuate, like Chicago and Gary and Detroit and all these urban places are just cesspools where crime is always at an all-time high. Nothing ever gets better. Kids never finish high school. Every young black girl's got a baby out of wedlock. That's nonsense. That's complete nonsense. Look at the data. Historic lows in teenage pregnancy. Historic highs in graduation rates right before the pandemic. I'm sure that now that the pandemic's over and we're getting back to school and everybody's sort of used to back in the swing, we'll probably pick up where we left off there too. And now here we are after a momentary 2-year uptick in crime. We are going back to where we were before the pandemic started. Now, the question is, why? Why, in spite of the fact that crime is at historic lows and has been for much of the last 20 years, 15 years at least, why, in spite of the fact that teenage pregnancy rates are relatively low in comparison to where they were in the 80s and 90s, and high school graduation rates are higher, why are there not more jobs for these young people? Now, see, this is why they gotta vilify young black people. This is why they gotta, and they get a lot of you guys to join in. They told us that we can't have jobs in our communities and we can't have businesses in our community because the crime's so high. Okay, when crime goes down, how come there ain't a bunch of businesses here? Huh? How come there's not a bunch of businesses here? When the high school graduation rates are higher, coast to coast, how come we're not seeing new businesses in black communities all over? How are we going to reward young people who are making strides and not doing the wrong things? The fact is we don't. Because our economy is not predicated on having a plan for young black people in these inner cities, in places like here in Gary, or in Detroit, or on the south side of Chicago, or Flint, Michigan. There is no plan for these people. The plan is to mass incarcerate them so that they are not competitive in the financial market. Or the ones who aren't incarcerated, to make them work for basically slave wages. As we have seen, real wages reached their peak in the early 70s in this country. And ever since then, American workers have been beat down. We talked about NAFTA last week that Bill Clinton signed that sent so many jobs out of the country. And then they opened up trade relations with China and sent even more jobs over there. Those are jobs that should have gone to black people. And now they're opening the borders. We're going to talk about that maybe next week. Maybe we will talk about that next week, where you have a sitting senator in the United States admit that the reason that so many illegal immigrants coming into the country is a good thing is because Army recruitment numbers are down. You want to know why they bringing so many of them in here? They are planning for World War III. They have no plan for black kids and for the poor kids in this country. And so all they can do is vilify us and talk about how horrible Chicago is. Oh, Chicago. Oh, Gary, Indiana. I tell people I'm from Gary, Indiana. Oh, my God, Gary, Indiana, the murder capital of the United States. You just Google Gary, Indiana. Oh, my God, Gary, Indiana is a cesspool. Man, 50 murders is a bad year for Gary now. In the 90s, it was 130. Gary is nowhere near as violent or as ruckus as it was in the mid-90s. Nowhere near during the crack era. If you actually remember the crack era, you should know that. But yet and still, the reputations remain. Because they have to have an excuse to bury black kids under jails. They have to have an excuse not to have jobs for these black kids. They have to have excuses. And so the public will always believe crime is going up even when it's going down. Now, ABC News put this on their website. I wonder if they put it on their TV show. I wonder how much it was on their TV channel. I wonder if NBC and CBS and CNN and all these other Fox News, I know Fox News didn't cover it. I know for a fact they probably didn't cover it. Okay, let's just be real here. Nobody is more invested in portraying America's cities as lawless hellholes than the right in this country. To justify their racism and to justify their fascistic tendencies to want to lock everybody up, to justify police brutality when the police murder George Floyd or Alton Sterling or you know, Amadou Diallo or Sean Bell or whoever. Well, if the cities weren't so bad, we wouldn't have to shoot somebody 41 times for reaching for their wallet. Well, what are you going to do when crime is lower than it's been in 40, 50 years? Then what? What's your excuse then? Huh? What's your excuse then? I'm just saying, folks, before you condemn young people, before you believe the hype about everything is always worse this year than it was last, look at the data. Look at the numbers. You might be surprised that a lot of the propaganda you get from the corporate media generally is not true. And just like they lie to you about the violent crime rates, they lie to you about the pandemic, they lie to you about what's going on in Israel, where a genocide is being waged currently against an entire ethnic group of people, just like they lied to you about the war in Iraq, they lied to you about everything else. All I'm saying is keep your ears open and keep your eyes open, and don't take what these entities, these same entities that protected Jeffrey Epstein and all of his friends for years, don't take their word for it. Think for yourself and seek the facts, the real truth, because you ain't going to get it from the billionaire-owned media. All right, folks. When we get back, I'm about to mop up. I got to get out of here before Marion Williams comes in with the 2x4 and kicks me out personally. Yes. But before we do, we got to pay tribute to a man I believe is the greatest individual this country has ever produced. You won't want to miss it. Be right back after this on My Country with Scott Cannon. We'll be right back after these.